102. That is the number of people who went into work in a plant in Cork on Wednesday morning and came out knowing their jobs will be gone before Christmas. Not a rumour, not a warning. A confirmed redundancy program with dates attached, the 26th of September to the 26th of November, and consultations starting the following morning. The company that made the announcement is Pfizer. The plant is in Ringaskiddy on the Cork harbour waterfront, where Pfizer has been operating since 1969. 57 years of Irish manufacturing, $10 billion invested. And now a statement that says, with bureaucratic precision, that this is about anticipated reduction in volume requirements and changes to small molecule operations. Here is the part nobody is talking about. That announcement landed on the 22nd of April 2026, exactly 3 weeks after President Trump signed a proclamation imposing sweeping tariffs on pharmaceutical imports into the United States. A proclamation that, under a certain reading, makes it significantly less attractive to manufacture certain drugs in Ireland and export them across the Atlantic. The timing is not evidence, but it is a question, and nobody in government has answered it yet. Before we go further, a quick one. Drop the city or county you are watching from into the comments and tell me how much time you have right now. Are you on a short break, or are you settling in for the full story? I want to get a sense of where this channel actually reaches. Now, back to Cork. Because the Ringaskiddy announcement is not really a Cork story. It is a story about the architecture of the Irish economy. Who built it, who benefits from it, and who carries the cost when one of the pieces moves. And right now, several pieces are in motion simultaneously, in a way that has not happened before. If you have been paying attention to Irish business news, you have the shape of this. You do not yet have the mechanism. The mechanism is where the money is. Here is what the 3 TDs from Cork South Central did on Wednesday afternoon. Donncha O'Leary of Sinn Féin called the cuts very worrying and asked the government to examine whether this is part of a wider issue in the sector. Seamus McGrath of Fianna Fáil said he would ask state agencies to engage with Pfizer immediately. And Padraig Rice of the Social Democrats asked Enterprise Minister Peter Burke to clarify what communication he had received from Pfizer before the announcement. Read that last sentence again. Not after the announcement. Before. Rice was asking whether the minister knew this was coming. That formulation implies something specific. That Rice, at the time of writing his statement, was not certain the minister had been briefed in advance. Which is either a reasonable political question or a signal that the government's flagship industrial sector can announce the elimination of 102 jobs in a Cork community, and the line of communication to the relevant minister is not entirely clear. The Department of Enterprise has not, at the time of this script, issued a statement confirming when Burke was first contacted by Pfizer. The system, in other words, has moved faster than the oversight. That is how this usually works, not incompetence, the rule. Now, Pfizer. Let us be precise about what the company actually said. The official statement describes a decision driven by anticipated reduction in volume requirements and changes to small molecule operations at Ringaskiddy. The company confirmed that the redundancies will affect employees supporting manufacturing operations. It said, reducing jobs is always the very last resort. It also said it remains committed to Ireland with approximately 4,500 colleagues in 4 locations across the country. That last figure is worth noting. 4,500 employees in Ireland today. In 2023, the number was closer to 5,000. 100 jobs went at Newbridge in late 2023. 210 jobs went across 3 sites, Grange Castle in Dublin, Ringaskiddy in Cork, and Newbridge in Kildare, in the final quarter of 2024. And now 102 more at Ringaskiddy in the back half of 2026. 3 rounds of cuts. 312 jobs gone or going. A company that has invested $10 billion in Ireland since 1969, that has publicly described its Irish operations as a key role in the global network, running a rolling series of redundancy programs in a country that has structured a significant portion of its economic model around exactly this kind of multinational presence. The chess pieces are being repositioned. Slowly, methodically, in ways that are individually explicable and collectively significant. Each move has a perfectly reasonable official explanation. The board, however, is changing shape. But here is where the story takes a turn. You need to understand what happened on the 2nd of April 2026 in Washington. Because without that context, the Ringaskiddy announcement looks like a routine corporate restructuring. With that context, it looks like something else entirely. On the 2nd of April, exactly 1 year after Liberation Day, the day Trump imposed his first wave of tariffs, the president signed a new proclamation invoking Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. The target this time was pharmaceuticals. Specifically, patented pharmaceutical products and active pharmaceutical ingredients imported into the United States. The default tariff rate in the new proclamation is 100%, not 15, not 25, 100. There are tiers and exemptions. Products from the European Union, including those manufactured in Ireland, face a reduced rate of 15% rather than the full 100%. Generic pharmaceuticals and biosimilars are excluded, and companies that entered into Most-Favoured-Nation pricing agreements with the U.S. administration before the 2nd of April face a zero tariff rate until the 20th of January 2029. 14 major pharmaceutical manufacturers entered those Most-Favoured-Nation agreements. The list includes Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Eli Lilly, Novo Nordisk, Merck, which operates in Ireland under the name MSD, GlaxoSmithKline, and 8 others. In exchange for the tariff exemption, these companies have made commitments to reduce prices on certain prescription drugs in the United States and to boost investment in U.S. domestic production. So Pfizer, technically, is protected. Until January 2029, its exports from Ireland to the United States are not subject to the new tariffs. The headline, on the surface, is reassuring. But let us follow the money on this one. The MFN agreement requires Pfizer to increase investment in the United States. That capital has to come from somewhere. It does not fall from the sky. If the company is committing to expand its U.S. manufacturing footprint, it is, by definition, making decisions about which parts of its global network to scale down, consolidate, or exit. The Irish plants are part of that global network. The small molecule operations at Ringaskiddy, the specific type of manufacturing cited in Wednesday's announcement, are precisely the kind of conventional pharmaceutical production that the Trump administration is trying to repatriate to American soil. The company's statement does not mention tariffs. It does not mention MFN agreements. It says this is about volume requirements and small molecule operations. That may be entirely accurate, but here is what an actual business analyst looking at this file would note. The announcement came on the 22nd of April, the MFN agreement was signed before the 2nd of April, and the tariff clock for large companies, for those not holding MFN agreements, starts on the 31st of July, 2026. The sequencing is tidy, even if the causation is unprovable. If this kind of breakdown, following the mechanics behind the press release, not just the headline, is what you have been missing from your feed, you know what to do. Now, back to the numbers. Everything we have covered so far is about one company, one plant, and 102 workers. That is the surface. The real story starts here. Number that the Irish Fiscal Advisory Council published in February of this year, and it did not get anywhere near the attention it deserved. Here is the number. 46%. That is the share of all Irish corporation tax revenues paid by just 3 corporate groups in 2024. 3 companies. Roughly 13 billion euro out of a total corporation tax take of 28 billion euro flowing from 3 sets of entities. The council has not officially named them, but it is understood they are Apple, Microsoft, and a U.S.-owned pharmaceutical group, understood to be Eli Lilly. Now here's the second number. The pharmaceutical and technology sectors together account for 87% of all corporation tax paid by U.S.-owned companies in Ireland. Not 87% of some narrow slice of revenue. 87% of the contribution from every American company operating on Irish soil. And the third number. Corporation tax now accounts for close to 1/3 of all taxes collected by the Irish state. 1/3. A decade ago, it was roughly 12%. So trace the chain. Ireland collects approximately a third of all its tax revenue from corporation tax. About 3/4 of that corporation tax comes from U.S. multinationals. And within that, 87% comes specifically from pharma and tech. And within pharma, the sector is so concentrated that a small number of companies subject to an evolving U.S. trade and drug pricing regime, account for an outsized share of that revenue. The system worked exactly as designed. That is the worry. The design was deliberate, of course. Ireland made a strategic decision over 50 years ago to offer low corporation tax, an educated English-speaking workforce, and EU market access to attract U.S. multinationals. It worked spectacularly. Ireland became the third largest exporter of pharmaceuticals globally, with annual exports exceeding €116 billion. The sector employs approximately 50,000 people directly. It transformed Cork, Galway, Dublin, and Limerick from regional economies into nodes in a global supply chain. But the architecture contains a structural tension that was always there, and that is now being tested in ways nobody fully modeled. The chess pieces that built this board are not Irish, they are American. And when Washington changes the rules of the game, the board rearranges itself according to American priorities, not Irish ones. The Irish Fiscal Advisory Council was explicit in February. It said that corporation tax revenues could rise or fall significantly in coming years, that the concentration of revenues in a handful of firms is growing, and that this level of risk argues for the government to save a larger share of these receipts than the 13% it currently plans over the period 2026 to 2030. The Council also noted something that has largely been missed in the public debate. In 2025, Irish pharmaceutical exports to the United States surged dramatically because companies were front-loading shipments ahead of expected tariffs. January exports alone soared by 130%. By May, the year-on-year increase had reached 833% in certain product categories. That is not real demand. That is stockpiling. And stockpiling, by definition, borrows from future export volumes. The front-loading effect is now unwinding. And that brings us to a data point that the government released just 1 week ago, and that is not yet connected, in public commentary, to the Ringaskiddy announcement. Ireland's corporation tax receipts in the first quarter of 2026 came in at a level 3.1% below the same period last year. The overall tax take was up 3.4% year-on-year, with income tax performing strongly. But corporation tax specifically declined. For a revenue stream that had been growing almost continuously for years, a quarterly dip is not a catastrophe, but it is a signal. The Fiscal Council's theoretical risk is now showing up in actual exchequer data. Not a crisis, a direction of travel. But all of that is still abstract. Here is what it actually means for the household that pays the bill. Corporation tax receipts at the levels Ireland has been collecting for the past several years have funded a significant expansion of public services, infrastructure investment, and the contributions to the Future Ireland Fund and the Infrastructure, Climate, and Nature Fund, the rainy day mechanisms designed to smooth out exactly this kind of volatility. If corporation tax declines materially, not just by 3.1% in a single quarter, but over a sustained period, the government faces a choice: reduce spending, increase other taxes, or draw down the reserves. That choice has not been made yet, but the clock started on the 2nd of April, 2026. Most people do not know it is running. For the 102 workers at Ringaskiddy, the clock is more immediate. Their redundancies begin on the 26th of September. By the 26th of November, the last of them will have left the plant that Pfizer has been operating in their community since 1969. Some will find work in the broader Cork pharma cluster. There are 20,000 people employed in pharmaceuticals around Ringaskiddy and the neighboring town of Carrigaline, across multiple companies. Some may not. That depends on whether Wednesday's announcement is an isolated event or the early data point in a longer series. There is a question that the brief for this video explicitly identifies as the one nobody has answered. If Pfizer is technically protected from the Section 232 tariff until January 2029 through its MFN agreement, why are the Irish cuts happening now? The honest answer is that we do not know with certainty. Pfizer's statement does not tell us. The government has not published any briefings received from the company. What we can say is this: the MFN agreement commits Pfizer to increasing U.S. investment. The company's chief executive, Albert Bourla, said publicly in April 2025, 1 year before this announcement, that Pfizer could mitigate part of the tariff impact by moving some overseas production into the U.S. The remarks came on a conference call with investors. The small molecule manufacturing being wound down at Ringaskiddy is among the types of production most amenable to relocation, and the company has been cutting Irish roles across multiple sites and multiple years, in a pattern that predates the tariff era but has continued without interruption into it. The chess pieces are moving. Each move is explicable in isolation. The pattern over time is what matters. Here's what Ireland's position at the table actually looks like right now. The government has built a tax model that depends on the goodwill, the stability, and the strategic choices of a small number of American corporations operating inside a U.S. policy environment that is, at present, actively hostile to the model Ireland built. The 15% rate for EU pharmaceutical exports is better than 100%. It is not the same as zero. The MFN agreements protect the largest companies until 2029, but they require commitments to U.S. investment that will, over time, draw capital and potentially production capacity away from the Irish network. The EU-US Framework Agreement helped establish that 15% ceiling for most EU goods. Ireland had influence in that negotiation as an EU member state. 27 seats at that table. One of them is Ireland's. The Irish pharmaceutical sector represents roughly a third of total EU pharmaceutical exports to the United States, making Ireland the single most exposed EU economy to pharma tariff risk. Whether that exposure translated into proportionate Irish influence on the framework terms is a question the Department of Foreign Affairs has not addressed publicly. Meanwhile, the Section 301 investigations, launched by the U.S. Trade Representative in March of this year, examining excess supply and forced labor practices across 60 economies, including the EU, will move to public hearings in late April. After those hearings, further tariffs or import restrictions remain possible. The next meaningful decision point in that process is the U.S. Trade Representative's recommendation, expected in the coming months. After that, the window for another round of escalation opens. There is still time for the Irish pharma model to adapt, to shift further toward the high-value biologics and cell and gene therapies that IDA Ireland has been building toward for years, and that are less immediately exposed to the conventional drug tariff architecture. That transition has been underway. Pfizer's Grange Castle facility in Dublin is one of the largest integrated biotech plants in the world. Eli Lilly's €1.8 billion investment in Limerick, announced in September 2024, is precisely that kind of high-complexity, high-value operation. But the transition takes years, and the Ringaskiddy workers who lose their jobs in November are not waiting for a strategic transition. Forms, talking to their unions, and wondering whether their children will have to make the same calculation that so many Cork families made in the 1980s. That is the shape of the story. Not a collapse, not a crisis, not yet. A structural tension that has been present for decades and that is now, for the first time, producing visible, named, dated consequences on the ground in communities that built their economic futures around the assumption that the American multinationals would stay. The board has not fallen over, but the pieces are moving. And the next significant date, the 31st of July, 2026, is 100 days away. Watch whether Enterprise Minister Peter Burke issues a statement in the next 48 to 72 hours, clarifying what he knew and when. Watch whether IDA Ireland publishes any statement on the pipeline for the Cork Pharma Corridor. And watch whether the second quarter corporation tax figures, due in the autumn, continue the trend that the first quarter began. This channel will be tracking all of it.